Hi everyone, my name is Nadje Noordhuis and I wanted to thank the Font Festival for hosting this masterclass. I'm a trumpet player and an educator and a composer, and I was lucky enough to study with the great Laurie Frink when I was doing my master's at MSM at Manhattan School of Music from 2003 to 2005. So we are on this sacred trumpet ground right now, just like to our left, that was the studio that Laurie taught in. So that's where I would go for my lessons. Yeah. Oh, everyone's left. Oh, okay. Okay.
Never mind.
This is going to happen. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So I first heard of Laurie in a book. Actually, I was studying at the Victorian College of the Arts in Melbourne, and I was house sitting for this bass player, and she had a book called Madame Jazz by Leslie Gorse, and I was like, oh my gosh, we exist. I had no idea of any other women brass players, and so yeah, one of the first entries was Laurie. I was like, oh, I've never heard of her. But then I was reading about her work with Jerry Mulligan and Benny Goodman, and that she was the lead player, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is, she sounds amazing. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I had a series of serendipitous events when I was over in New York for a vacation in 2002, and I ended up deciding to apply for my master's at MSM. And when they were sending me the information sheet, the first year her name wasn't on the list, and the second year it was, and I'm like, I need to study with her. So I had no idea what a completely amazing brass guru she was. I just knew that she was a woman, and that was really exciting. So that's where I moved 10,000 miles, was to study with Laurie. So I'm from Sydney. If I just sort of fast forward to where I am now, so I'm actually studying a PhD. Well, I have started. I should possibly do a little bit more work towards it. But it's called Extraordinary Teachers. It's about the interactive pedagogy of Carmine Caruso, Dennis Schneider, and Laurie Frink. So originally I was trying to document her teaching and the way that she taught. And to a certain extent, the exercises, but at the same time, the more that I was doing a deep dive into her teachers, I found it quite impossible just to talk about her by herself. So she studied with the great Carmine Caruso. For those of you that haven't heard of him, he was like the brass guru in New York in the 80s. And what's really interesting about Carmine was that he wasn't actually a brass player. He was a saxophone player and a violinist, and he came up with this method of like a series of calisthenics to, we say, to expose the body to the muscular demands of the instrument. So it's basically teaching your body how to play. So he came up with that. When Laurie was studying in Nebraska, she was studying with a really amazing trumpet teacher called Dennis Schneider. And I remember in our lessons, she had mentioned him, but I didn't ask any questions, and I really didn't know anything about him. It wasn't until I was actually doing my research to try and come up with a topic that, like, I was reading dissertations on him, and every 5 minutes I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I teach that and I teach that. So I thought it was really important to research all of their contributions and how they all sort of interacted, because Dennis Schneider, once Laurie actually came to New York and was having lessons with Caruso, she told Dennis Schneider how amazing the lessons were, and actually Dennis Schneider ended up taking lessons with Caruso also, and then started teaching his methods to his students. So there's this sort of interactive, which I find really, really cool. And actually there are some tapes of the lessons. So my PhD is going to be on that. And well, we'll see what happens after I interview lots of people and try and come up with a way of putting all this information together. Just to talk a little bit about where this sits in the sort of the lineage of the brass family tree. We're all familiar with Clark. And then also there was Louis Maggio, which some of you may know. His story is quite fascinating in that he injured himself and then he taught himself a way of repairing his chops, and he was playing, I forget which symphony he was playing in, but he ended up being able to return to his job in the symphony and was stronger than before. So Dennis Schneider actually studied, oh, is that right? Hold on. No, then there's, I'm drawing pictures in the air. There's also Claude Gordon. Has anyone read the systematic? Yeah. So Dennis Schneider studied with Claude Gordon, and Claude Gordon studied with Clark and Maggio. So that's the lineage. So it's, if I've gotten my family tree correct. My PhD is not finished yet. I'm still so I'll, come back in 4.5 years and I'll be a little more decisive. But to my memory, it goes like Herbert L. Clark always approached the cornet with a happy frame of mind, in a happy frame of mind. She would say that. Laurie would say that. So it's Clark and Maggio who were the teachers of Claude Gordon, who were the teachers of Dennis Schneider, who was the teacher of Laurie Frink. So that's the lineage. Cool. Any questions? Good. Okay. So Caruso's exercises, similarly to Laurie's exercises, were not a methodology, and I feel like this is the tricky part because we all want to know what these exercises were, especially how to apply them. If we have some difficulties, what do we do? And I feel like a lot of us trumpet players at the moment are like, what do we do? Like, we don't have the person that we would usually go to for help. There's been some research done and some dissertations written that list some exercises that she would commonly use, and I'll talk about some of them today. But at the same time, it's like almost like going to a doctor's office and then finding like a list of the prescriptions or something. It's not going to be really helpful if you don't have the knowledge behind it in order to work out what to prescribe as such. But that's where we're at. So let me talk a little bit about some of the Caruso exercises. And so what's really interesting and very different to, say, the Arnold Jacobs school, where he was a Chicago tuba player, who was all about, his whole system of teaching was about like airflow and everything's got to sound good, right? Caruso's approach was like, do the exercises and it doesn't matter what it sounds like. So don't think of it as good or bad. It's just, you are just exposing the body to the muscular demands of the instrument and then moving on. So his exercises weren't a methodology. They were to be used as a supplement to the Clark or the Gordon or for whatever methodologies that you were using. It was always a supplement. It wasn't to replace your Arbans. It's to be done in conjunction with. So the first exercise that I guess that's Caruso was most well known for is the 6 notes. If we're familiar, if we play the trumpet, and there's not all of us do, which is fine. It's fine. Everyone is welcome. So let me demonstrate the 6 notes. So what it is it's a long setting. So the mouthpiece is on the face the entire duration of the exercise. So the reasoning behind this is that you're building strength, but you're also building the flexibility inside the mouthpiece. So what it is you start on second line G, and then you go to C, third space C, chromatically. You've got a half note, whole note, and then the whole note rest. And actually, the whole note rest is actually very important because a couple of things happen in this, and I feel like the documentation of this part of it isn't. I haven't seen it done very strongly. So in Flexus, it has like breathe through the nose, yeah, but it doesn't say rest the face. It does have, like, in the writings of it's called the preliminary exercise in Flexus. It's not called the 6 notes. Like Laurie Frink and John McNeil do write that it's not an isometric exercise. But a lot of people do this and they keep their face really rigid when they play. And so at the end of the exercise, they're really tired and they're like, oh, this exercise is exhausting. Or I'm like, now I can't play for the rest of the day. And it's like, well, if you rest your face in between, I give the analogy in my lessons that it's like going to the gym and picking up the heaviest weight and holding them above your head for 20 minutes. That is an option, but perhaps there's better, more efficient options, right? So I'll demonstrate it for you. So the first note is a breath attack. And the reason why it's a breath attack is you want to get the articulation out of the way. You want to establish the airstream, and then the tongue is like a valve, right? And on the airstream, it's just going to break it up. So of importance is the sense of time. And so Caruso would always say all these exercises are done in time because the majority of music that you play is in time. So you're teaching your body how to play in time and strengthening your sense of time. So although sometimes there's metronome markings, if you learn to be your own metronome, I think that's sort of a good idea. So he would always start with a preliminary four beats. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So breath attack. Relax your face. Breathe through the nose. Relax your face. Breathe through the nose. I know you know what's coming up, but I'll keep going. Breathe through the nose. Breathe through the nose. I say this all day. So the original exercise goes back down to the G. I'll just do the G. Etc. Right? So that's it. Thank you. Thank you very much. I've been practicing. Yes.
I understood that the first note was a breath attack. Did I hear you doing do or two on the second and third note?
I usually, in terms of articulation, I basically have 4, ta, da, or 2 or do. I usually say ta because it just gives a little bit of a crisper.
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one is breath attack, and in Flexus, it's notated with an H, and then T, it's like tongue, or I say tongue, right? For the subsequent things. So you're really establishing the airflow first, and then you're just putting the articulation on top.
That's a quick question.
Yeah.
Do you do any preliminary in terms of buzzing or mouthpiece trim?
Yes. Yeah.
Because that's not in Flexus. They don't talk about it.
No. It doesn't. So, let me finish with the 6 note, and that's great. I'll go to that. In Caruso's life, there was only one book written, he only wrote one book, and he was not a fan of the result, so he vowed never to write another book. So yes, you get that from us. So it was actually, I have it here. Yeah, the musical calisthenics for brass, and I think from what I remember from my research, there wasn't like, I think some of the explanations around it were edited. So I think he was unhappy with it. So I mean, the exercises in the book are valid, and those are the ones that he would use. There was the 6 notes are in there, but yeah, from memory, it's just the 6 notes. In Flexus, which is by Laurie Frink and John McNeil, that same exercise is documented as the preliminary exercises, but there's also different variations of it. So you wouldn't do that one exercise forever. You would go on to the subsequent ones, and I think there's a lot of question about when to go on to the next one, on which ones to go on, and so that's a little bit like asking how long is a piece of string, right? So I think she would say leave it at least 3 weeks or 4 weeks if you're doing an exercise. Like, spend time with that exercise before moving on to the next one. So yeah, so that's a very, very rough guide. But in my own teaching, there's some students that I have still on that exercise. I've adapted it where sometimes I will just do it without the repeat, or I would start on a different note, depending, you know. So I always like to mix things up. A lot of, in my teaching, I'm using the materials from Laurie, but I'm also talking a lot about airflow. And in my own personal lessons with Laurie, she never talked about that at all. And so, and in the readings that I've done, I thought, oh, she never sort of talks about it. But I was talking to another trumpet player friend, and he's like, oh, she actually gave me some airflow exercises as a part of a recovery routine. I was like, well, okay, great. You know, just when you think that you have the answers, it's like, well, no, actually. So everything is always very grey, and so I feel like it's sometimes a little bit hard to document as if everything is black and white, but it's not. It's very grey. It's very about, you know, all I think in Caruso and Schneider and Laurie, we're all about teaching the individual, and I think that's a really important point. So in Laurie's lessons, she would have like a piece of staff paper, and she would write your individual lessons, and then you would come back the next week and she would write you another sheet. So a lot of people have these lesson sheets, and then but then you compare them and it's just like they're all different, and like, well, why did she give you these ones, and why? And it's like, don't know. So yeah, so it's like yeah, trying to make sense of all that is a little bit tricky. Yeah, so just as an example of some of the variations of the 6 notes, and then I'll move on to something else so everyone doesn't fall asleep. You can do a lip bend, so. Relax the face, breathe through the nose, right? Etc. Yeah. So going back to your buzzing question, in my own lessons, I like to almost divide them up into 3 categories. I start with breathing, and then I do buzzing, and then everything else. And then in the everything else category is flexibility, articulation, range, maybe some scales for good measure, right? But that's sort of how I think about it. In my lessons with Laurie, we never did any breathing exercises, to my recollection, but we would do buzzing exercises. So one buzzing exercise that we would do was actually a Caruso exercise called lips, mouthpiece, horn, And actually, Julie Landsman, who is a French horn player, has a great video of that on the YouTubes. But the exercise starts with free buzzing, and then it moves to mouthpiece, and then Laurie would always say to me, whatever you buzz, you play. Whatever you buzz, you play. So, So the example, I'll just do the exercise. So you would start off free buzzing, free buzz to next T. It would be like. Seconds. You know what's coming up. It's beautiful choir. Oh. We gotta keep going now. Come on, let's keep going. Good. One more. Good. Excellent. You can tell the trumpet players and the non-trumpet players. I'm just like, I'm not going to do it. Awesome. All right.
Is the set important in terms of smile versus like pucker?
I never do the smile thing.
Yeah.
That's not a. She never talked about it, and from what I read,
Yeah.
I think there's another way that's maybe more efficient. I think about just putting the lips together, like you say, the letter M.
Yeah.
The thing with free buzzing, I love free buzzing personally, and I do try and design it in a lot of my lessons, but for me it's overtraining. So I'm really careful about how I do it. So with this lips, mouthpiece, horn exercise, depending on my student, I'm not going to assign that free buzzing, especially if it's like the first thing they do. I feel like it's a bit much. If you're if you've been playing for years, it's not going to be as much of an issue. So I think it's one thing that you just I'm always just sort of conscious and careful about. So then what you would do is do the same thing. And I'm not thinking of doing a really quick change. There's some methods that do the little quick change. I'm more like, let's just like take our time. Etc. Right? And then in the trumpet. Right? And again, they're all done in time. Like all these, it's like as soon as I start, it's like my foot just starts. It just keeps going. I don't know. I don't do a long setting for this one. Etc. So that was originally a Caruso exercise. And it's not in flexus. But on a lot of notes, there's versions of that floating about. So, any questions?
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
I found that one to be invaluable. I'm very lucky I'm going to knock on Laurie's wood. I hardly ever had chalk problems, but I did. So who should I go to? Go to Laurie.
Yeah.
And that was the first thing she told me to do, and it just draws yourself together and strengthens everything, and it's all sizzly and fizzly. It just pulls it right together.
Yeah.
And
It's instant focus.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, sometimes I'll do that and then I'll put free buzzing later in a routine. I don't know. I just tend to, no. I mean, it's different. It's different every class with every student. But sometimes I'm like, yeah, too much. But if they can do it, and obviously sometimes starting on that G is really, really taxing. So sometimes what I do as an alternate is I start and then go up in half steps. So sometimes I'll put that in front, or sometimes I'll do it a bit later on, or sometimes I'll say, do it when you're brushing your teeth. Well, not while you're brushing, but like after or before or something, like couple it with something else, because it is a lot of overtraining and, so that's sort of like one way that I've adapted that. Yeah.
With these kind of things, like you're saying you change, it's different per student. Do you feel like you change it every day because of how you feel, or is it always the same? So.
I change it on from what I'm hearing. Yeah. So it's like if a student comes in and I hear them having some like fatigue issues, or if like the notes aren't coming out, I'll assign certain things.
I mean for yourself more, like
for myself,
when you're like practicing or playing.
Yeah, it depends. Like, well, to say if I have a gig, I'm not going to do a whole lot of free buzzing, or I might start like lower, and the whole day I'll play more quietly, for example. So yeah, there's a lot of variables. Yeah, it's sort of a little bit tricky. Yeah.
More recently, I used to do free buzzing as a way to kind of warm my lips up, get some feeling in them. But there are lessons I would take with people who study with Laurie Frink that would talk about vibration of the lips, and I practiced with Alex too. So from watching her, this kind of become more important. I'm trying to understand this vibration of the lips from buzzing as it applies to playing the trumpet. And I do notice a different feeling when I kind of am thinking about that on the trumpet. I feel like I'm getting to that point where I could be more resonant and more projecting. But it's hard to keep it consistent because sometimes it feels like another muscle that I might not should be working in. But just as far as vibration and projecting, like I feel like I played all these years just not projecting because I wasn't thinking about that vibration.
Right. Yeah, I like to think of like whatever is happening here, this is just like an amplifier. So if you can get this really solid and happening, then hopefully then this should sound okay. And for me, the air is a big thing. And in a lot of my lessons, I would say like 90% of my lessons, I talk about air like constantly. So I feel like sort of at the junction of those two things is like, easier sound production and good sound and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah, with the free buzzing, it's one of those things because some people hate it and they refuse to do it, and there's a whole lot of schools of teaching that they say don't buzz, or you do mouthpiece buzzing or free buzzing. Whereas I'm like, I mean, obviously that's not exactly how we play when we play, but I feel like it's very helpful. Yeah, a bit like for me, like stretching isn't how you run, but also helpful. That sort of thing.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Let's move on to the flexibility part. So in Flexus, there's like these really amazing flexibility exercises that I really love. And so I'll demonstrate the first one. So it's I call it flex number 1 because it's the first one. Page 18, I believe. Anyway, so in the book it's documented with a repeat. So. Say to me, when you need to take a breath, just add a beat. Yeah, so you're doing this in time as well. Some adaptations of that I like to do is like to do it all articulated, etc. Or sometimes, for me, if I'm noticing a student is having some articulation issues for me, I always talk about access points. It's like, how do I access that easier path? And for me personally, I've discovered that some, like, articulating faster and then slowing down is easier than articulating slowly and then trying to speed it up. That's just sort of what I've found over the years of teaching hundreds of beginner trumpet players. So I would often get students to just go, one exercise that I do is we just say ta 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 ta. Then it gets weirder. I get them to say it through the trumpet. Right? And then if that's not weird enough, then I say do that and then blow air. And then do that and then get a sound out. And to be able to do that without changing it back to how you usually do it is sometimes a bit of a challenge. But for me, that's like an access point to a very light and easy articulation. So then what I would do is I would apply that to the flex number 1. Etc. So that's one thing that I like to do. So in flexus, then it goes up for each partial, and there's yeah. I mean, you should. Most of you have the book. If you don't have the book, please buy the book. If you buy it from John McNeil, then he gets more of a cut. So, just saying. Does anyone have any questions?
I would like you to comment on the breathing through the nose versus the side, and leaving it in a long position.
Yeah, I think the theory behind it is that you don't want to disturb it. So if you're breathing out the side, it may be okay, or you may just, disturb what's happening. The whole point is you're building a flexibility within the mouthpiece. So you want to try and keep that as still as you can. And again, remembering to relax the face. So yeah, that's why your nose, which is
Do you play that way as well?
is good. No. No, sometimes I remember when I was doing a lot of jingles, that I had to be like super accurate on like crazy notes, and I would sort of like set up and I'd be ready, and then I'd be like okay go, and then I would play and then I would come out. So it's like sometimes I've used similar to you, yeah. So yeah, just being really conscious about it. Usually I'm listening. I can tell when a student is feeling fatigued on certain, like, after they finish, I'm like, it started to get tricky on this note, right? Like, you start to feel the burn, on this note, and they're like, yeah. So it's like, just sort of listening out for that. You don't want to be completely annihilating yourself on these exercises, because again, they're meant as a supplement. So these are, it's part of a comprehensive warm-up as a strength builder, but you don't want it to, it's like you don't want to like run a marathon and then do a sprint or something, So it's about pacing yourself, which is hard to do because we're all trumpet players and that's not what we do naturally. We're all like, go, like, so, yeah, just trying to be conscious, I guess. Yeah, and also just like relaxing, like really relaxing the face. I tell my students, like, think 2 a.m. face. I think, that's it. Because often they'll be like, okay, I'm relaxed. And I'm like, no, like 2 a.m. Yeah, like that. That's relaxed, So trying to access that could be potentially helpful. Yeah.
Just a clarification on those pages of the flexibilities. I've heard it both ways, but when she writes the variations of the exercise with different slurring patterns, were those meant to be articulated on each one or breath accented?
They would be articulated. Yeah. With the breath attack, yeah. Sometimes I get asked like, are these breath attacks? And she never mentioned that. And in my lessons, it was never so. I tend to do it because I am like all about the airflow, so I just want to make sure. but for my students, like either way, I don't think it makes a difference. Yeah, I'll show one thing that I find incredibly helpful, and it's a little hack that I will tell you, so don't tell anyone else. Is that, let's say I will do that same exercise, but I'll do the next one up, just, to do really different. So it'll be this, usually students will come in and they'll play. And you'll be like, okay, that's cool. I over years of teaching small children and trying to get them to blow air through the trumpet, and also older children so have the same sort of issues. So I do, I just like to blow air through the lead pipe. I imagine like flooding the lead pipe with air, and I just open my armpit. So I do an exercise like this. Etc. Right? So it's a lot of air. You're going to run out of air a lot faster, and usually people are a little bit dizzy. So then you breathe in and out through your nose to return to earth, right? All right, and then when you play it again, and you can hear the difference in the resonance. Yeah, so it's a little hack. So I do that exercise, I would say 98% of all my lessons with all my students, some version of that, like, and working out ways to incorporate that into their warm-up routine. Just to get the air flowing, because if the air's not flowing, then we tend to get the pressure. And if we get the pressure on, then the endurance goes, the sound goes, everything goes. So my whole thing when I'm teaching is how do I, when I think about that, I think of the arrows of energy going this way. And in my lessons, I'm trying to turn them around and make them go that way. So it's like I'm listening for, when the sound is starting to narrow, I'm listening to fatigue, I'm watching the body, I'm seeing how tense it is. I'm just sort of like, sort of Terminator style, like trying to work out what exactly is going on, and then assigning exercises that I think will help. So, and really that's just exactly what Laurie would do. I'm trying to do what Laurie did, and obviously I can't be her, but I feel like that really helps me teach the individual, and then the individual can hopefully improve faster. So, any questions? Are you sure?
Of course.
Yeah?
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's an exercise in Flexus that I'm just perplexed about.
Okay.
Starting on your E, playing the F, G.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Oh my God. And bending, keeping that E sound. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. I don't. Let's have a look. Let's find it. Because I have done this, and I had a similar question.
I just don't know why you do that.
Bending is good for finding the center of the note and the full resonance of the sound. In my lessons with her, she would always assign like the bending series.
Yeah.
And she loved By Men, which was that great flexibility book. So there's always there you go. I'm just trying to find it. Where is it? But I remember trying to work out. It isn't now. I'm just not seeming to find it. Can you find it for me?
I think it's just after articulation.
Oh, okay. But the bending. When I first started my lessons with her, I could barely bend the note, So it just sort of over years does listen to here.
You're right.
Yeah, because the way that I approached it, I was wrong. My students like, no, that's not how it means. So maintain the E pitch while fingering F. So and then the note is going from E to F to E to F to E, but the F is like a little, it's not like it should, like, maintain E, F, E, first you go, I always get confused. Maintain E pitch by fingering F, so, is an E.
There's the E bit. I just
So-
can't do
Yeah, I mean,
that. That's wild.
it is wild, isn't it? I never that's page 40, I'm still on page 18.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. So, and then there's the next one, maintain E pitch throughout. I guess possible.
I always thought it was sort of like, I haven't done that exact one, but I've done similar things, and for me it's been like helpful as a resistance thing,
Right.
to try to like build resistance, and then when you go into the upper register, sometimes there can be like a ease once you've like worked out that type of resistance work in lower registers. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
similar here.
Yeah. I mean that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've done also stuff kind of similar to that, and I feel like it helps bring like the higher notes like more in pitch. Like it brings the pitch down, that you're not like overshooting the higher notes.
Yeah.
Well, you can find your pitch like that. I
Yeah.
definitely agree with you that that's a perfect example of finding your sweet spot for the high register. But I've never seen it at this level. It's just, I went, are you kidding me? So, I was shocked by it.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, we never did this in I know. I mean, I will admit I was not the greatest student. But the lessons, maybe I'll talk a little bit about the actual lessons with her. Like, you know, yeah, for me, you know, I just moved to a completely different country and I was having a completely different experience at college. And so for me, my lessons were, I've heard this so many times, were almost like therapy. Like, I would talk for like 55 minutes, you know, and then we would run a couple of things, and then that was it, you know. So we never got to this because I was busy complaining, you know,
I totally
about stuff, you know. So it's like, you know, yeah, one exercise that I really loved, and she would say, because I tend to have a very short attention span, and it's hard to do all this, like, sit down and like practice all these exercises. I have some students that are so good at it. I'm just like, I don't know how to do that. You know, I was going to invent this thing called the practice seat belt, and it's like, and it's got like this little dial, and it's like, so you set it for like 15 minutes and you can't get up. So if you want to take that idea and like, you know, yeah, exactly. But but then Laurie just said, well, just do this and go play, you know. So she gave me a shorter exercise because she knew. I was like, oh, how did you know? You know. But the exercise that's in the book that I really love. I think I forget what it's called, but. She would just get me to do that, and in the book would go. Yeah, I would. Yeah, and then I would go up in minor thirds. Right, so I just got good at one diminished up here. It's just empty a slide on the other ones, you know. But yeah, yeah. So I really love that one in the book also. There's also one called Flexando, which I particularly would really like. I call it the elephant. And for those of you now, I have to demonstrate it. So I would do this one like slowly. It's slowly. I'm thinking in the book there's a repeat. I can't remember how many times it says to repeat. I usually do it like three times. So. One slowly and then. Right, hence the elephant. Yeah, and I find, like, for example, doing air only, I call it air only because I have no better name for it. So if you can think of something, that would be great. I'm actually in the process of doing like a whole like online course with all like exercise, but yeah, so I need a new name. Air only doesn't sound very, very hip. Anyway, but I would do like, so I'm imagining the air going through, I'm imagining the notes. So then when I take a breath, and maybe I can take a low, I mean already the resonance is better. Yeah, because that's the hack and it works.
Why do you think coming down's easier than going up? Like the starting on the F sharp, going down to the F sharp.
Oh, doing it that way?
Yeah.
Well, your embouchure is already set like this, so it's easier to relax. Rather than if you've got a relaxed embouchure and then you. Yeah. That's what I would assume. Yeah. Any questions? Sure. Yeah.
In recent years I've done, but more recently this summer I've done like days in a row doing at least my interpretation of what the instructions in the beginning of the book, going through the whole book as a routine, either throughout the day or in one sitting if I just have to get done, take 2-3 hours. And it's a crazy workout, but it's really good. And sometimes if I do it as a routine, and this happens with other routines, I kind of get a dependency on it. Like, I know you're not supposed to do it on the day of the gig, but if I'm like really anxious, I will do it.
Right.
But sometimes like I want to practice other things, but I feel like I should do my homework first, really, and it feels good.
Right.
But
do you feel like exhausted after it, or you feel like your chops feel
if I
good?
get enough rest, I feel good. But it's more of just like, do I want to sign up 2 or 3 hours of my life every single day?
Yeah. Well, some players do. I know some players that's exactly what they do. They go when they're on tour. They arrive, 4 hours before the gig, and they warm up for 3 hours, and then they have an hour off, and then they play the gig. So there are players like that do that. I'm more of the I'll just play my one quick exercise. It's like I have things that I do, and I feel like it's a very personal thing. Like, I don't think
it feels like a mental thing. It's like I know I have
to
to
do. Yeah. I feel like if you cover things like, for example, like flexibility, like just covering your entire range in a way that feels good and that you're not straining, and working on the flexibility so you can get from note to note. And I feel like if all that kind of stuff is taken care of, then I feel like chances are good that it's going to be okay. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, you could just do that, but I feel like if you don't want to do that necessarily, so try cutting out or cutting down on certain things, or if there's repeats, like just take the repeats out and see if you can cut it down to a shorter amount of time, and then maybe that feels good. I feel like there's ways of, I feel like there's certain things that are important to do. Like if I did a gig and I didn't do any sort of air exercises, or if I didn't do any buzzing or anything, I would be just having a really bad day, So I think it's like a matter of doing the things that you need to do in order to feel comfortable, but not to the point of completely exhausting yourself or exhausting yourself more than you need to. Yeah. To leave some gas in the tank, just in case. Yeah.
That's something that we worked on together, because I was going from feeling really dependent on doing that, and then it's like, if I have like 2 gigs in a day, can we just work up like a 10-minute thing? And so we did the crom dims, the chromatic diminish thing, and same thing. Instead of doing every single one, just do every minor third.
Right.
And then we did bends with no repeat, and then I'll just do maybe seconds for a little bit, but not go too high on the seconds, and then the flexando. And that was for me, that's the gauge of if the air's flowing really good, if that feels good.
Yeah.
And so we worked on going from 2 hours down to like 10 minutes and feeling like I could go play a gig. So, just cut things. Cutting things is a big thing.
Yeah. And things that, like, for example, with these, the long settings, they can be quite taxing. And I know Crusoe said, like I was reading in actually like a letter that he wrote is like you don't do one of like, you know, you would leave it at least like 15 minutes or so before doing, if you were to do another long setting. Like for example, one that I mentioned, maybe I'll just quickly mention it, is like the Caruso thirds or the Caruso seconds, and that's all notated in the actual Caruso book. It's not in Flexus. But that's just a long setting. Let me just quickly, I'll demonstrate do the thirds. I usually describe the C scale, and then once it starts getting trickier, I describe every half step, but I'm just going to do the first couple, just for the sake of time. So this is another a long setting, but you would go, so, you know, tap your foot. Relax the face, breathe through the nose. So then I would do, well, and then Laurie would say to me, go as high as you can until it starts squeaking. So for example, if I would get this like that, right? Just pretend I did all the other ones in the middle, right? Okay. And then when the sound peters out and it sort of like doesn't sound how you want it to sound, you finish that one. That's really important to finish that one, because that's where the work is actually happening. So you finish that one, and a lot, I think in the Caruso book, that's it. But in my lessons, she always tagged on another part, which was you rest for 30 seconds, and then you start up again a third down from where you ended. So I would go back to the F. Breathe through the nose, and I would do the same thing until the same thing happened. I may be able to do maybe one more, maybe you know, and then I would rest. So yeah, I feel like I haven't seen that adaptation sort of written, or like the videos that I've seen of people demonstrating the Caruso thirds. They've never done that section, but that's the section that I've always done. Yeah.
What does long setting mean?
Long setting. Oh, sorry. No.
No.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Long setting just means the exercises that were originally the Caruso exercises, where you have the trumpet on your face the whole time. So really, it's like the 6 notes, and the thirds. Okay. So, and when I say the thirds, I mean it could be seconds, fourths, fifths, sixths. There's a whole series: 7s, 8s, 9s. Yeah. So I know most people, you know, I usually don't get past the seconds or the thirds. You know, yeah. Any final questions?
So with little kids, what type of things from Laurie's stuff do you pull in with like beginner kids? Do you do?
Yeah, right. I would do like the 6 notes. I wouldn't.
Right.
I wouldn't do straight away. I would leave it a year or two. There would be like sort of like more like flexibility exercise. You just like just trying to get those sorts of things happening. I would do a lot of like, I do like lead pipe exercise. I have the exercise I call moose calls. Actually, an ex-student named it moose calls for me because I did the same thing. I'm like, lead pipe exercises sounds so boring. Can you think of a better name? And they're like, how about moose calls? I'm like, yeah, that's more like it. So I spend many hours of my life on Zoom doing this with people with, you want to aim for almost like a flat E, you know. So it's like kids love that sort of stuff, but it gets the air going. So yeah, so in terms of the Flexus book, there's not so much. Like an adaptation of lips, mouthpiece, horn would be something that I would do. I would get them to like bend, you know. Usually it's unsuccessful until it is, you know.
Yeah.
So, but I would do it backwards. That sort of thing. Or I could get them to do a version of of the 6 notes, but without the long setting, if that's too confusing. Or make it faster. Usually with younger kids, I do faster articulation and then slow it down. That sort of thing, but you know, it depends, because if that's boring, then yeah. So I try and make it a bit more fun, because I know how awful it is to have boring exercises to do. So I try not to assign them. So I'll you know, depending on like the patience level of each of my students, they'll be like wildly different. Like some students, like buzz the theme to Harry Potter, you know, and other ones I'll be like, play this one note for 3 minutes, you know. So it's sort of like just really trying to tailor it to each person, so they want to pick it up the next day. Yeah.
With the intervals, like the seconds, thirds, fourths, I think I do like seconds all the time. I rarely ever do thirds. I've done fourths once. I've never gone past. Do you think like is the goal to have each of those exercises feel the same as seconds? Because I feel like I'm practicing a different thing. If I'm doing the seconds, it's like, can I not adjust from a whole step or a half step? And then if I was doing fifths, it'd be a different thing.
Right. I mean, I think it's all about introducing a variety of things that your body is working out a variety of ways to get through. So if you've been doing seconds for a while and it feels good, usually in my lessons, if an exercise starts feeling good for a student, I'm like, great, we're going to change it. You know? So it's like I'm always constantly moving the comfort level. So if you're comfortable, to me, that's a sign that you do something different. And that means I call it the woods. You're going into the woods. So the woods is where the notes split, or like it's uncomfortable, or you're just doubting your life, or whatever. That's all part of the woods, because on the other side of that is where you want to be, like what you want your sound to sound like, or that. So when I'm in a lesson and I'm hearing notes splitting or things not coming out, I'm always like, yeah, because it means that you're in the woods. It means you're on the way there. So yeah. So my general advice would be, if it's comfortable, then celebrate briefly and then move the goalpost. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think I'm done talking about it.